thank you for joining our session. My name is Karen Hutton, and I'll be your host for today's webinar, where we will hear Mark Gatos and Josh Nyer discuss the various aspects that go into a decision of moving a data center to the cloud or not. We hope you enjoy this discussion between Mark and Josh, but first let me introduce them. Mark Gatos is our Chief Marketing Officer here at Nlight Software. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
He is joined today by Josh Nyer, Vice President of Data Center Infrastructure at TransUnion. Josh has been with TransUnion for over 3 years, and prior to that, he was responsible for the Americas region of Data Center Infrastructure Management for HSBC. Josh started his career in technology, and since the adoption of moving critical infrastructure support to within IT operations, Josh has been instrumental in the integration of the daily facets of facility operations and that ever-changing and demanding requirements that come from technology that most of us are very familiar with. Since working for TransUnion, Josh has contributed towards the build-out of a new data center, along with defining and executing a strategy that consolidates down to a minimum number of facilities to ultimately manage and reduce OpEx. So thank you, Mark and Josh, for joining us today. Mark, would you like to start us off on the discussion?
Sure. Thank you, Karen. This is Mark Gatos. I would like to thank you, Josh, for taking some time and talking about TransUnion's perspectives on to cloud or not to cloud. I don't think you can go anywhere today and not hear about the public cloud and hear about how great Amazon's doing with people using AWS and companies considering using the cloud in a variety of ways. So I appreciate the time you're going to be spending with us. And I want to thank everybody who's listening to this webinar. We appreciate the time you're spending with us also. So Josh, thanks for spending some time with us.
Yes, a pleasure to be here.
Great. So we try to keep our webinars pretty quick, so we're going to keep them fast moving. Josh has a lot of sort of information and perspectives on using the cloud from TransUnion's perspective. Our agenda, which is pretty loose, is going to be quick introductions, overview of TransUnion. Then we're going to talk about sort of how you folks view the cloud use cases there at TransUnion, and sort of your perspective as a vice president of data centers, the considerations you see as you consider moving workloads out to the cloud and when to use it, when not, things to consider. So, and then at the end we'll have some Q&A. All right, so that's sort of the agenda. Josh, did you want to sort of talk a little bit about sort of your background and an introduction to TransUnion?
Certainly. Sure. Thank you, Mark. So I have been managing data centers in terms of the infrastructure and operations for several years now. And as mentioned earlier, that Karen had said about utilizing or the building of relationships between the facility infrastructure and also the IT infrastructure owners has really been some more of the maybe uphill challenges that I've gone through in my career, but most importantly, the use of either proper tools or, in this case, decisions on where is the best place to put your infrastructure. The marketplace certainly has made it easier, obviously with DSIM solutions, but also having cloud computing space in a variation of flavors. Not only does it make it somewhat more complicated, but it's a good complication because it offers more choices. As a member of TransUnion, we're actually getting away from the old style of just being a credit bureau providing information about consumers. Rather, we are adopting the more of the philosophy of we're a risk information solution provider, giving more than just information, rather even some determinations based on data. TransUnion has been around for a long time now, but just most recently we've been going through a major information technology transformation, and I'm very happy to actually be with the organization at this time most importantly, just based on how our infrastructure is supported, where it actually is, and then how do we continue to look at our strategy down the road, and what does the change in not only cloud computing, but also in the management of the data centers themselves. And it's certainly something that you just don't make up on a napkin and then execute it the day later. It really is a lot of collaboration, not only amongst the businesses, but also all of the different IT hardware owners.
Okay. And are you involved with sort of all the data centers worldwide, or is it mainly managed out of Chicago, or like sort of what is the sort of structure from your perspective?
Sure, yeah, sure. Our structure is interesting to say the least. We actually have a few large-scale size data centers that are local in the Midwest of Chicago or Midwest of the U.S. We do actually have some smaller data center footprints in some of our local areas of some business units. We also do have some co-location rack space in addition to very minimal managed services, and have already actually vacated out of some of the managed services that we were in. So our mode of operation from the corporation perspective is to have full line of sight to all of the different data centers, whether they're on-prem or off-prem, and we help actually administer process and procedures, some governance and controls, and then, of course, obviously the budgeting is all handled out of Chicago as well.
Okay, great. Hey, I just need to take care of one housekeeping thing I didn't state. If anybody has any questions, please submit them into the chat. It appears we're having some people having trouble logging in. Just so everyone on the call knows, if you have associates who are having trouble logging in, we are recording this webinar, and we will send a link out after the fact so people can listen to it on their own time. So again, if you have any questions, please submit them into the chat button. And again, we're going to send out a link to everybody who registered and be able to listen to the recording. Sorry to interrupt there, Josh.
No problem.
So I guess today you guys already exist in a hybrid situation. You have some amount of resources in the cloud and some amount that are not. I mean, do you have a general sort of idea what sort of percentage that is at this point?
Sure. So just even based on the number of devices or square footage, we have a much larger presence on-prem in the fact of being in our data centers today. We have recently removed ourselves out of a managed service environment that was providing us everything with compute and level 1 and 2 support. We've chosen to relocate those services into our own environments. We have a complementing pair of data centers. And so by removing ourselves out of that cloud, in a sense, is a step of the direction getting out of the cloud. But at the same time, we still have some businesses that we've acquired, even just in the last 18 months. They have some cloud presence of their own, and we're in the process of evaluating and timing it up as to when would be the right time to bring them into our internal stack. And then the last part, we actually are continuously exercising any SaaS providers. Give you a good example, Salesforce.com, as everybody is probably really familiar with them. But we're also even getting into the ServiceNow SaaS cloud to help us provide better support and management tools for our IT operations team.
Okay. Well, it's sort of good to sort of talk. When we say cloud, it means a lot of things to different folks, and I pulled this from StackExchange.com, but there are a variety of these out there. I mean, when we're talking about cloud, there's sort of different types of cloud, right? There's sort of the applications like Salesforce.com that you were talking about. There are companies using frameworks, and there are a variety of those out there, right? Google provides them, Windows Azure, even Salesforce has Force.com, where you can write your own applications and run it on their frameworks. And then I think that often people, when they think cloud, they think AWS, they think rack space, where you're basically getting the compute capacity, the networking, and so forth. So would you say that from your perspective, TransUnion's investing on all three layers, or is it more SaaS and infrastructure? What would you say?
Yeah, actually, so it would be more so SaaS, and then infrastructure being on the second part of that list. I didn't actually speak too much of the Amazon piece. My boss, he is actually in charge of all of our infrastructure and support for TransUnion, and he said it best when we've now started the framework of AWS, and his expression was, we've built the shipyard. Now it's just going to be a matter of determining what kind of ships are we going to build. And in that respect, it means, is it going to be some, very quick and easy elastic compute style processes that we might need something immediate but not long term? And on the other hand, it might be something that could become more sustainable, but in the sense of going with the infrastructure service, some of the things that we're really looking at is just, getting in, figuring it all out, having all of our info security controls in place. Every bit of monitoring that we would have on-prem, we would expect to also have in the cloud. So for our sake, SaaS has been, predominantly used in a lot of areas and successful. We have looked actually at the frameworks part, particularly with Office 365, and it was more of a decision internally to build it on-prem and create all of our support staff to then be able to handle that large of an Exchange/Skype environment. And it's actually proven very well. But again, that's also part of the conversation to have about, would you go to the cloud or not? And usually you have to look at it and say, can I afford to have the equipment on-prem? And two, what support staff do I have? And the frameworks piece is a little bit of both of them. I guess to say that you just have to make a decision. Do you want that service outsourced or not? We look at it, in this case, wanting it insourced. We kept it in-house.
Okay. Why, though? I mean, what's behind that?
Oh, sure. So a lot of times, and you had mentioned it earlier, everybody always hears of the cloud, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same everywhere. And so when we've chosen to look at things in-house, clearly, it's about the support that you're provided by your host. And in the event that we actually removed ourselves out of a cloud instance, of a managed service environment, we already have a 24/7 operations center. We also have a large group of engineers specific to a variety of platforms. And just to be simple enough to say, when you have a storage, network, hardware, and data center team that also are complemented by an operations and incident management team, we've already got that framework in place. So at times we look at it and say, how much do we have to rely on a specific vendor to provide us with that uptime that we need in order to satisfy our customers' requirements and demands? So our decision at that time was based on looking at the cost to stay in the cloud and any future growth, and then we looked at the cost of putting it all internal and just adding it to our existing stack. And to be quite frank, the numbers were near the same. It's choosing to go to cloud or not is not always, and most importantly, shouldn't be based on how much is it going to cost. Another factor involved is when you buy your own equipment, you have the opportunity to use capital and write it off. And going out to the cloud, we see it as merely all OpEx. So how much of a cost save are you really going to get? At times it may not really be a factor. Rather, we look at it as saying, what are our customers experiencing and how much control do we have? And in this particular instance, we chose to actually bring it back to us so that we are in control of the response and support that we give to our customers' infrastructure.
Okay. Well, I'm sort of looking at the use cases here, and I think, going with a Salesforce.com or a ServiceNow, completely understand that. At an application layer, you're buying the functionality and they're managing all that. That's great. in here you talk about a managed service provider to perform on-demand analytics and tooling platforms. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, certainly. Because, as they say, cloud can spin up within hours. And, of course, based on understanding your requirements of what you actually need, we like to refer to it, the term at least, of elastic compute. Basically saying if somebody's going to have a project or they want to do some type of a development proof of concept, we would then need to buy hardware, install it, getting it spun up, and perhaps maybe only being used for 3 months and looking for another reason to utilize that equipment, it becomes the new challenge. And in the case of going to a managed service provider, again, it's that on-demand, click a button after you have your requirements, and now you've got your infrastructure set up in place. The teams are able to use it quite rapidly, and then when they're finished with it, it's just a matter of just shutting it off and no longer having to utilize those services that are available. So the on-demand, and I'll say tooling platform, is it may not necessarily be used for our production environment, but rather to help us simulate a production environment and vet out whether or not something is going to work. And then if it does, and if it's progressively getting better by being in the cloud, well, then the decision might be easier to stay in the cloud, or conversely actually bringing it back on-prem, but then using that benchmarking that we've already figured out what will work and has to work, and then building it out on-prem.
So, how does somebody get those resources? Do they go through the sort of normal IT request process that they would normally, or do they already have access to those resources?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, Mark, because as soon as you give everybody access, you'll have more instances spun up than you could ever imagine until the credit card runs out. So
Union probably has a very deep credit card, I would think. So.
Yeah, well, we do, but we have very particular stockholders who like to actually ensure that we are doing what we should be doing, and so right. I think that's a fair discussion topic, is the ability to provision the resources amongst the various teams. We are looking more at a DevOps format of a shop. Today we're not. We have our development side and we have our infrastructure side. They do work very well together. But in the case of being able to give developers an easy button to spin up whatever they actually want, that does not alleviate the dilemmas of having people who are in an instance on-prem or off-prem, and then when they're finished using it, what happens to it? Does it just go into vaporware or not? And so we will and have controls in place that we'll be using a service catalog request system that would then offer more of a customized drop-down. What are your requirements? What is it that you actually need? What are your SLAs? And then it'll be analyzed by our architects to then determine, is it something we bring on-prem or do we actually push it out to the cloud?
Okay. So, I guess the belief, many folks believe that eventually all organizations are going to have some sort of hybrid model, right? But from your perspective, you know, you'd mentioned cost may not always be the main consideration. It sounds like how you allocate these resources are a consideration. What other sort of considerations are there in your mind as you guys are evaluating, hey, do we go to the cloud? I mean, we've all heard stories about companies that say in the next 2 years they're going to be entirely in the cloud. Everything is going to be in the cloud. Whether that comes to pass is another story altogether. But I mean, what are your, I don't think that's the plan for TransUnion. Why don't you tell us sort of long term, do you think you guys are going to have more in the cloud, or do you always have premise type of resources, and what you think the main considerations are for you guys?
Yeah, sure. No, and before I can even, comment on what it would be for us, I wanted to, quickly express my thought process on when companies would go to the cloud, and like you mentioned, full blown out into the cloud. Companies who are more startup or don't have much of a presence when it comes to their own physical infrastructure, or may not even have the capital to even go that far. Going into the cloud would certainly seem like it's the most sound thing to do, right? And then you have companies, say like TransUnion, who's not only been in business for 30 plus years. We actually look at it and say, we've already got our infrastructure, we have a pair of data centers, we even have the fiber between the data centers. We are continuously building towards an enterprise class of data center service management. But with that being said, as we continue to look at the extensions out to the cloud, it's really more about where are we the most agile. And by having either compute available at a readiness need, or if it happens to just be a cost savings advantage for some reason down the road that we don't want to actually make investments at the time, as long as we clearly understand where our capabilities are, where are our security measures, and what are they in line with, that's what's going to help us be able to decide further down the road, do we put more infrastructure out in the cloud, or do we rely on the cloud as a turn-on, as-need basis, but then basically shut it off in the event to then start to build it out in-house? And I want to really clearly articulate, when you have a staffing model that we do where we are 24/7, mostly on-prem with some offshore support, our model would drastically have to change, obviously, to reduce the OpEx cost of having the support technicians within TransUnion, but rather than relying on them as part of the OpEx that you're paying for those cycles to be spun up. So our understanding today is we are going to continue to host, most importantly, our business critical applications and also our information that we do store. We're not at that point of feeling, extremely comfortable, but rather it would take a very large turn of events within our organization to need to start looking at reducing our internal OpEx and then changing it to somebody else's OpEx. And for us, we're a company that wants to innovate and stimulate the associates within our organization. And so our mindset is, it doesn't really matter where the hardware is. It's how quick and accessible that you actually can get to these systems, but more importantly, how protected are we? And the protection is by far our number one and highest priority out of anything. And if somebody were to try to explain to us that, yes, it's cheaper and you'll need less people, but we can only hope that your data is going to be protected and secured at all times, that's not going to fly with us very well. We want to know that what we're into is very secure and proven, but more importantly, what are we really gaining? And necessarily just, having to outsource people's jobs, or even more so, is to save, some money in the front, but maybe not in the back. We have to be smart about, why we're going to take this approach. And what I've seen especially is that we're taking this, again, much more of a smaller baby steps towards the cloud, and even more so is some of our managed service environments that we have gotten into over acquisitions. We're removing them from there because of our stance that we have on-prem.
Okay. Well, and so on this next slide, you guys still have a lot of resources you manage yourselves, and you guys obviously use Enlight Software, that we're the ones sort of sponsoring this webinar, and as a data center infrastructure management software provider, how do you see DSIM playing into sort of in the cloud and in managing your own resources? Is it less critical? Is it more important? What are your sort of thoughts how DSIM sort of fits in one of the puzzle pieces within the strategy?
Yeah, Mark, there's no doubt about it. The DSIM solution is so important for on-prem and hybrid. because when you get into that further point of it's all in the cloud, what I would expect is the managed service provider to actually have their own DSIM capability and understanding. And as we look at having, our infrastructure in our own sites, and then also having some connectivity out to the cloud, our DSIM is actually a complement to our configuration management system vision. And that vision, which is where we tie in our logging agents, our discovery tools, and then furthermore our service desk, in this case the soon-to-be SaaS ServiceNow, we are looking to tie all of those together. And again, what that allows us to do is make the smartest decisions immediately at the time of an issue or an event. Events don't always mean outages, but what they mean is a system change in the normal parameters, and something needs to be addressed. So our sake of having DSIM is because we actually do rely on knowing everything that we have within our data centers, and the next step is to be able to auto-discover between the assets that we actually have on-prem and then out into our, I guess I'd say our visibility in our command centers, and having the cloud connected to our data centers is going to then be more service-based, right? What services are being hosted within those cloud spaces, and then what sometimes limited data are we able to actually get in order to help us, in a sense, make some predictions on any type of an event or failures of our services. So to us, it plays a very key role, and as we do move things to the cloud, it'll help us be very specific about what we are in control of versus what we're not in control of.
Now, are you guys planning to use DSIM, or do you already use DSIM today to sort of do chargeback? I'm assuming as you go to the cloud, the people paying that OpEx, if you're going, whether it's Salesforce or whether it's AWS, that the business, does that just go against the data center, or do those expenses go against the different business groups? And similarly, do you guys do chargeback through DSIM to your own, with your own resources to the different business groups, or does it just fall in the data center bucket?
It does fall in the data center bucket, and I want to just comment that is a very interesting conversation and topic that we have around the organization, is the ability to do chargebacks, and most of it has always been on because of excessive use or abuse. And so what we're doing is actually working closer together on monitoring and visualizing everything that we are using, and then doing analysis based on, how often it's used, or if not at all, who it was assigned to, and becoming a little bit more personable to some degree, and having relationship conversations with different groups and saying, we see you're not using this, what gives, right? What are our expectations from you guys? And so we're looking at more of a better 18-month type forecast, not necessarily this is what you're getting, this is what you're paying for, and give us a cost center number. It's something that TransUnion has not chosen to go down that path as of yet. But I do appreciate and understand the ability of cost charging, and our DSIM tool would be very good at doing that if we went down that road. And it would be the same as having to model something very similar for the AWS or other type of infrastructure and SaaS providers.
Okay. So we're sort of starting to run out of time here, Josh. We're coming up to the 30 minutes. We have a few questions I'd like to get to, but what is your key takeaways, your thoughts? Just if you were giving advice to somebody else who is thinking, who's running a data center today or multiple data centers and is thinking about using clouds in some shape or form, what would be your sort of key takeaways or advice?
Sure. So obviously we talked a little bit about cost, right? And don't just expect it to be cheaper. And at times, if it seems like it's more expensive, just really pay attention to what it is that you're getting out of it. Don't always just go with the cost as the reason why you're going to choose to go cloud or not. Look for cloud in terms of flexibility. immediate use, within hours, maybe the organizations don't have that. They don't have the kind of buying power either to be able to get servers and storage and switches at a discounted rate because of their buying volumes. Cloud providers do. So, you know, the cost comparison could be greater if you don't buy many servers to begin with. So if you go to something like AWS and the amount of servers that they're buying, they're obviously getting them at a much, much greater price. The speed to deliver, which also then goes with the flexibility. Again, if your business needs to have infrastructure stood up immediately because it's the way the business is run, it's obviously one thing. But if the company is lacking the ability to get infrastructure spun up quickly enough, I would say, again, don't just rely on cloud. Rather, look at what efficiencies or processes you can change within your own organization. And again, having a decent tool is obviously something that helps support that, to know where your infrastructure is and what's available to you. So don't just, you know, think that cloud is the only way to get faster. And basically the last part of it is always prepare yourself for what it's going to be if you have to get out of the cloud. And fortunately, we've had a few of these scenarios, and we've had a chance to, you know, go to the board and our executive leadership team and pitch the reason why we want to get out of the cloud. And the first one was interesting, where we did not include the fact that we couldn't rely on the provider enough, and that we wanted to have our own support in place. And it's not about money, and our CEO was very clear about that. He said, you don't just have to come to us because something's cheaper. You have to come to us because it actually makes most sense for our customers. And in that one case, it really did. It was more about what the customers and their experience that they were going to be getting while we hosted the infrastructure. And so, you know, be sure to understand what it takes to get out of the cloud, especially if people do release their staff, you know, perhaps specialists that they have, and because their infrastructure is going to go to the cloud, if you ever wanted to go back to the cloud, the rehiring process is going to start right again from the beginning. And I would suspect that that would be a big reason why a lot of people choose not to get out of the cloud, is because then they have to go through an entire organizational effort to re-support that on-prem hardware.
Okay. Well, we've had some questions come in. I'm going to just throw up the screen for additional resources if people want to check out these resources. But we did have some questions, and one of them related here pretty specifically to what you were talking about. It's what kind of cost analysis does I'm putting in the TransUnion. What kind of cost analysis do you do before moving to the cloud?
Oh, yeah, sure. So we look at So bandwidth and the peaks are clearly a part of charge. So we do look at that piece of it. And secondly, the costs are based on what we do for CPU cycles today. So fortunately, we have standardized to a particular open systems platform, and we know what our costs are for all of our hardware, our software, and even more so is our support services that we have to provide to that hardware. And then we would just look at it and base it on the number of CPUs to servers to storage, and then just basically do a guideline. And that's why I was saying before about we're using this to basically benchmark, because we're going to basically jump in, as we have started to jump in with AWS, and then it'll give us an actual real-time evaluation of what we have on-prem to what we have in their cloud, and then use some of that data to figure out, you know, is this what we expected to from a cost? Is it less? Is it more? And even more so is, are we getting what we thought we were going to get at that cost? Okay,
interesting. We have a bunch more questions, but we're sort of over time. I'll take this one last question. I found this sort of an interesting question. Does the business have a preference for using the cloud, or do they not care?
So that's a great question, right? When you talk about the people who are supporting the daily livelihoods of the technical people that support the infrastructure, of course, they would look at it from the mindset of let's preserve the jobs, let's keep what we have here, and so those particular business heads, I could see them somewhat shying away from cloud. In fact, one of our data center managers even said to me, he goes, well, I guess maybe is there some point I might not have a job because of the cloud? And I said, well, not right now, because we don't expect to actually release everything to the cloud. But, and this is the interesting part, is that when you have executives, right, and fortunately we're an IT company, so our executives really do get technology. But there are times where people may just say, look, I heard the cloud is better, cheaper, faster, why aren't we in it? And I'm going to say to a fair degree, it might just be a checkbox that they want to be able to acknowledge, look, we've done some things in the cloud, we've gotten some things off-premise, we're reducing some of the support staff because we don't need to actually have them, and it's more about that bottom line. Which, of course, is why our executives are, in charge in order to help continuously make us a sustainable company. But here, there's no real assertiveness. Rather, it's we should know exactly where it fits, when it fits, and then execute it because we actually have the confidence that it will work. So maybe a few years ago, it might have been more about hey, we should be in the cloud, we should be in the cloud. And as the understanding of it matures more, it becomes easier for us to have conversations with our C-suite to explain to them what we see, why we believe something should or shouldn't be in the cloud. And fortunately, again, because they run a technology company, we really actually have a very good rapport with being able to share with them the operational efficiencies, not just the financial piece of it. And so we have a real good rapport with our executive team, and as much as they enjoy seeing us experimenting and even getting into the notion of doing some things from a business side into the cloud, they're not really forcing it down our throats to just get off premise and get into the cloud.
Sounds like it's very balanced. They just want to consider it, and if it makes sense, use it, and if not, they're completely fine with that.
Yep, and there are we've seen some companies they're claiming all in on the cloud, and for our sake, maybe cutting edge and bleeding edge is a difference of company direction. We're more at that cutting edge and the bleeding edge, and want to have a little bit of exposure to things as we see it happen.
Okay. All right, well, we had a variety of questions we did not get to. I will forward them on to whoever needs to answer them, either from the Nlight side or on the TransUnion side. Josh, thanks a great deal for doing this. It's very valuable. We'll be sending out, as I said, this link. We've recorded this webinar, and we'll send it out to everyone who's registered. And again, I want to thank you, Josh, for the time you took in prepping for this and in doing this presentation. Thank you very much.
Sure, no, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, and I think that brings us to conclusion.
Thanks, Josh and Mark. This does close our presentation, and we look forward to having anyone listening in join us on the next Nlight webinar. Contact us for more information at info@nlight.com. And thank you again.
Okay, thanks very much, Karen.
Okay, bye-bye,
Thanks,
Josh.
Mark. Okay, bye.